Hi guys, it's Amerie, and today I'm doing a response video, basically adding to the conversation that Ariel Bissett started. I'll put her in the link below in the description. And basically she was talking about the literary canon and what it really means as far as how static is it really. You should definitely check out her video so you can kind of hear her thoughts. Basically the literary canon as we know it would be the Western literary canon. The Western canon would be anything that is considered important to and influential in Western culture. So that goes for art, music, and if we're talking about books, literature. Shakespeare, Homer, Plato, Sophocles. I remember when I was a kid, I had the encyclopedia. My parents bought the Encyclopedia Britannica. And part of the collection was something called The Great Books of the Western World. And this was basically an attempt by the Encyclopedia Britannica to create a volume of works that were all part of the literary canon. And the first book was like The Great Conversation, and it was basically just authors having dialogue with their predecessors, with other authors and their works. And then after that, you know, you just had all these different volumes. There was Shakespeare, which I tried to read some of. I mean, I was a kid then. I was like 9 years old or maybe 8 when we got that, and I loved it. We had the atlas. I did a lot of playing with the atlas. I just like to imagine worlds and things like that. So, you know, there are works with Voltaire, and they included Huckleberry Finn, as well as some other works, Hemingway, The Great Gatsby. The argument against the literary canon would be that many of the works have been canonized by white men, and many of the works are themselves created by white men. And so it brings to issue, you know, the lack of women in canonizing these books, of people of color, people of different sexualities, etc., etc., etc. And her argument, Ariel's argument, was that although it is problematic, it's important to have because it kind of everyone's kind of reading the same thing and engaging in the same conversation. I actually agree with Ariel. I think that although it is problematic, it's good to have a reference point. In this internet age, when it comes to art in general and how we consume culture, as far as videos, movies, music, everything's out there, which is amazing. Like I love Netflix, I love HBO Go. But the problem with having so much, like having like a plethora of options, is that it's not like it was, say, 30 years ago or 20 years ago when everyone you knew was watching one show. Everyone you knew watched this one movie or saw this one thing on television and could engage in conversation about it. When everyone's watching something different and everyone's into something different, it's kind of hard to find like that cultural reference point that we can all relate to in some way. It is good to kind of have that, I guess, that literary canon, just as a starting point for conversation. I do also think, though, that the canon is a living thing and should be added upon, and it should continue to take shape. So when we're talking about great literary works that should be included, why not add sci-fi and fantasy in there? And before you guys go a little nuts, I know a lot of you guys probably read a lot of science fiction and fantasy, as do I, but before people go crazy and you're like, that doesn't hold next to Shakespeare and Plato and Hemingway, I argue that actually fantasy and science fiction have been so much a part of our literary history. Going back into ancient cultures, we could consider that fantasy now. Those were actually considered spiritual beliefs or religions, and then they've kind of since gone into mythology. Even Shakespeare, for instance, he's so revered for his work, and then it's debatable whether it was one person or not, but for all intents and purposes, let's just say Shakespeare was a guy who actually existed and created everything. A lot of the work that he created is a fantasy. Isabel Allende's The House of Spirits is magical realism, and sometimes people like to touch on magical realism because they don't really want to go into the realm of fantasy because it seems like that's so genre. That's a whole other discussion though, but you know, there's great science fiction and fantasy out there that really speaks to where we are culturally, represents where we are as a civilization, and I think it's a mistake to not include these things. It's not like, you know, about being politically correct to include people of color or more women, or particularly writings of with feminist leanings, which really is just kind of just equality. Many cultures have influenced Western civilization. A lot of it is attributed to Greek culture, but if we really go back even further to the Egyptian culture that influenced the Greeks, that influenced the philosophers that we hold so dear today, there have been people of color influencing Western civilization from the very beginning. So I think it just makes sense that we continue to add on to the literary canon. So those are my thoughts on that. Let me know what you guys think about it as far as what you think should be added to the canon. What are great works that you think are very influential or have influenced culture, literature, music, art, basically Western life as we know it today. Let me know. Bye.